Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes, a place where we share stories from brave and courageous people who have navigated challenges, crisis, or a change in their personal or professional life and gave it a new meaning. It's a platform where leaders open up about their fears, vulnerabilities, and the journey that led them to triumph. Our hope is to inspire and motivate others to take their first step towards thriving changes. Today, I'm in conversation with Udo Graf. In his current role, he's a strategic advisor to medical device companies. Previously, he's had a long, successful career with Mentor Worldwide, which is part of the Johnson & Johnson family of companies. During his 28-year career at Mentor, he has held several senior leadership positions. In this conversation, Udo shares his leadership learnings, the importance of having clarity on our values and living them out every day in our personal and professional life, and the role they play in us living a fulfilling life. It was such an enriching conversation. Our hope is that you too find it valuable and walk away learning a new perspective. Welcome, Udo. Welcome to Thriving Changes. It's so wonderful to have you. I'm so grateful that you took out the time and do this podcast on our platform, Thriving Changes. So thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thanks for having me, Rena. I'm very excited to spend some time on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've heard you speak before and I know the wealth of knowledge and learnings that you shared previously. It was so informative, and I had so many takeaways from that on a personal level and developing myself as a leader. I think our listeners are going to gain a lot from hearing you and from your expansive career.
Well,
So,
thank you for those kind words.
yeah. I usually ask my guests to tell us a little bit about themselves because I don't think so I can do justice to what you've done. So, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. By education, I'm a high energy physicist, but after completing graduate school, I got into the medical device industry with a publicly traded small company that specialized in minimally invasive cardiovascular work. And after about 3 years, I had an opportunity to join a company by the name of Mentor. That was a mid-size publicly traded company. And I thought it would be a good step in my career growth. And I ended up being with the company until I retired from them. So I spent a little over 28 years with Mentor. My career started in the research and development function, and I was fortunate enough to get increased levels of responsibility until actually leading the R&D organization. Our areas of focus were the aesthetic and reconstructive arena, as well as urology. And in fact, Mentor was founded originally as a urology company, and we made a strategic decision in the late 2000s to focus primarily on reconstruction and aesthetics and divested our urology business. And then in 2009, were acquired by Johnson & Johnson. I remained in R&D as VP of R&D for a few more years and then transitioned into global education as well as a strategic role in global strategic marketing, where I was active until I retired from Johnson & Johnson. It was actually, Rena, a very interesting experience coming from a very small company to a mid-sized company that was then acquired by a multinational company in Johnson & Johnson. So it gave me a view of different ways of operating, different ways of management, and certainly size and scale. And it's interesting in that as a mid-sized company, our executive management chose universally to leave and not be part of Johnson & Johnson. It was not a negative thing. It was just that we were used to making all the decisions. And in a Johnson & Johnson world, you're negotiating for budget. It's a different form of management structure. I chose to stay, not knowing what this future was going to bring me, and was very appreciative and thankful for having made that decision. Johnson & Johnson was certainly a wonderful company to work with and expanded my knowledge base, expanded my experience, gave me exposure worldwide. I spent the last several years before leaving Johnson & Johnson as a subject matter expert with my experience in research and development as well as strategic marketing, speaking worldwide to physicians about the benefits of doing the procedures and how to get the most out of the products that were being offered for the benefit of the patients. It was an amazing journey and a very difficult decision to retire from Johnson & Johnson, but I also believe that you certainly go into a role and give 100% every day. And at some point, I felt that I also owed it to my family and myself to dedicate more time to them. So that's the reason I made that decision. And I try and stay active, even if we want to call it retirement, semi retirement, I guess. I stay active in doing projects, but maintaining the right balance of dedicating time to family and grandchildren and my parents while still being challenged through some of these projects. And so a lot of the work I do now is with smaller companies where we try and work out some challenges that they have and help them to the next level and help them grow or maybe even come out of a very difficult situation, which has been exciting. It always feels good. I think everybody would admit to this, that when you're doing something that results in a positive outcome, whether it be for the employees of a company, whether it be for the customers of a company, that is a sense of not only accomplishment, but also a fulfilling feeling that you're making a difference in somebody's life. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts I've been given throughout my career, to be able to do that and feel like I'm actually making a difference somewhere and have people be thankful for that. It's just a tremendous reward.
It's good to hear that, because not we don't hear that, I think, to not as much as we should be, to make a difference in the world, and how especially people from the corporate world, even in the role that they are in, but despite that, they can still make such a lot of difference in their own way and bring in their experience, their mentorship, and support the junior staff, the people that report to them, can benefit so much. I'm a huge fan of mentoring. I've been mentored, and it has played such a huge role in my own development as a person, as a leader, as an employee, and it makes such a lot of difference. So, thank you.
It does. Yeah, it does, Rena. And you're right. Drawing from our own personal experiences of how we've had people help us see things differently, learn ways to be successful in developing our partners at our professions. I think drawing from that is, you're right, is very important. So things don't always go well throughout our careers. There are challenges, and how we deal with those is obviously very important, and how we learn from those is very important. So as we learn from our mentors, I think you're right. It helps shape us and helps set us up for passing that along and providing that mentorship to others. And one of the key things for me is to always stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish, what the goal is, understanding what the goal is, and then executing that. And I've always told my teams, I believe to be successful, we have to focus on our customers, our coworkers, the environment we live in. Johnson Johnson has a credo. For those that haven't read it, advise it. It's not a marketing pitch. The company uses that to assess the performance of the folks. And they listed in order of priority, where number one is the patients we serve and their families, and number two is the employees, number three is the environment and the community we live in. And if we do those three things correctly, then the business will see a fair return, right? The shareholders will see a fair return. Now, when General Johnson wrote this credo, he was the only shareholder, which was interesting. And that was in the 1940s. And what's also interesting is that he had a focus on the community we live in, the responsibility we have for the environment, and so on, long before the green movement actually took off. So for me, I try and tell people that if you do the right things, the rest will follow. You can't flip that around and focus on the business and say, what do I need to do to make the numbers work? What do I need to do to be more profitable? And focus on the financial side. You have to focus on the actual product you're delivering, the service you're delivering. And if you do that successfully, the business will follow and will be successful. And more importantly, it'll be sustainable because now we're being honest with ourselves. So we never have to worry about going back on our word. We are who we believe we should be. We follow our mantra, whether you want to call it our mission statement, our vision, whatever word you want to choose. But if we stay true to that, then we don't have to worry about how people view us and what people think we're about. And we see examples in the business world where that sometimes doesn't get followed. And then people try and force financial success over what the actual deliverable is, what we're actually trying to accomplish. And then it gets very difficult because then you're switching around and trying to change strategies to benefit the numbers, where the important thing is to stay true to the strategy. In my opinion, it can change and should change as the environment evolves that you live in. But whatever it is that we're setting out to do, we need to stay true to that. And then it'll be sustainable and it'll be successful. And that doesn't necessarily mean overnight financial success. It may be a marathon and not a sprint. But as long as we stay true to it, then we should see a healthy organization.
This was a later question for me, but I'm so glad you brought this up because you're right. That's where we need to start. And building that culture, building it needs to be the very fabric of our environment, to have those values very clearly laid out. And I think leaders in organizations, they need to model those for people to see, and not only model, but I think it's very important for them to verbalize them often and make sure that it's being carried forward. In general, culture starts at the top. So if the leaders are modeling it and are stating what they truly believe in, it trickles down, it causes a ripple effect, and the organization benefits it. And then you're right, if we stick to it, those results will start flowing. So tell me, how did you implement this within your teams? What were some things that you did to make sure that the culture is healthy and the environment is healthy?
So I think it starts with making sure we have the right team, the right people on the team. And so as managers, we're responsible for making sure that happens. I've seen too many times where people have made the mistake of looking at resumes and having these questions like, how did you deal with this kind of project or this kind of problem? That is important, but what's more important is that culturally, once you know what you're about, that you build a team that is receptive to that and has the desire to learn and evolve and the openness to accept. And so that needs to come out of these interviews, and that needs to come out in the hiring process. If you're in a very customer facing business, for example, you can have the smartest people in the world that live in a lab, and this is not a negative. They do what they do very well, but they may be more of a single person contributor in a lab that uses their intellect to come up with the next big idea. We need to put them in a role to succeed and make sure that we don't put them in a customer facing role where they'll fail. So it's about recognizing the right spot for the right people and the people that have the right culture and the right thought process to fit into where we want to go. And if we happen to have people on a team that perhaps we've inherited or that have been there for a long time and are not fitting in, it's not fair to them either. Then we have to have a very open and honest conversation with these people and say, where can we put you so that you can succeed? Because where we're going with our team is in a little bit of a different direction, which will make them struggle and make them unhappy because they're in an environment that they don't feel comfortable in. So once we sort that out and lay the groundwork and have the right people in place, then we've set ourselves up for success. And then after that, as you mentioned, it's very important to demonstrate the culture, to live the culture, and to reinforce that culture and bring people along. And I believe from my experience, the right people in this environment are the ones that want to grow, they want to improve. It doesn't mean that they necessarily want to be the next president of the company, but they enjoy being able to contribute more. They enjoy being able to learn and know more about what they're doing every day at their job. So giving them an educational avenue, having conversations about where we're going and what excites you. Where do you want to go with this? And very often we've seen lateral moves where people said, I want to do this for a year or 2 years because I think it'll broaden my knowledge base and build my experience. And then I want to come back. So give people an opportunity to learn where they feel they have the most passion. Now, it's not always possible. Obviously, at a company not like Johnson & Johnson, there are a lot of opportunities. So it's a lot easier to say, sure, we can do that. There's an opening over here. Let me talk to the manager and you can move over there for a while. In a smaller environment, that's not always possible, but we can still create those educational opportunities and those growth opportunities and build that passion and get people excited about it. The other thing is, I think it's important to make sure people have ownership. It doesn't have to be a financial ownership. It doesn't have to be shares or whatever, but believe in and love what they do, be passionate about it, and be proud to go out and show that to our customers, have those conversations, relay that passion. I think that's what it's all about, is to build that relationship. And the key word there is partnership, not just internally, but externally as well. The best customers are those that also feel that they're part of what you're trying to do. And we did activities such as volunteer activities just to get people, whether it was building a home for someone, whatever it was, the food bank, whatever it was, we would say next week on this day, you will get paid. But we were all going to go out and work at the food bank or work the homeless shelter, wherever it may be. And I think it builds that appreciation for somebody else needing something that we can provide. And it builds pride, it builds ownership, and it's obviously also a great team building experience. So I think those are some of the things that we do to create a very strong team. We did not believe in pointing fingers. We did not believe in blaming others. We were a team and we were all in it together, no matter what level we were at, including, and that's the important part, it includes the manager. The manager has to demonstrate that he or she is open to having someone come to them without any retribution and say, hey, I may not understand all of it, but this is what I see, so I wanted to share that with you. And as a manager, if I can say, I really appreciate you bringing this to me, and then either explain why it is that way or acknowledge that was an oversight and something that we need to work on, is so valuable because nobody is immune to making mistakes. We all know that. Nobody is immune to being caught in a rabbit hole where all of a sudden, dropping into a tactical level and maybe forgetting the big picture. And so to be able to have that open communication up and down the chain in a team is the secret to success. And this does not mean criticism for the sake of criticism. It means providing valuable feedback that becomes actionable to people. And when I see our teams do that amongst themselves, I know we're on the right path. To have those conversations, and at Johnson & Johnson, we called it one-on-ones. We encouraged people either through a mentorship program or for through outreach to connect with people, not just within our same company, but with other J&J companies, and just put time on the calendar and say, once a month, we'll have a one-on-one and we'll have a conversation about my experiences here. And then the other person can talk about their experiences and they can exchange their ideas and their thoughts. And it just enriches everything. Knowledge is so important and experience is so important. So the more we can share that and the more we can benefit from each other, regardless, as I said, of position. We've had junior engineers have one-on-ones with presidents of companies, and those presidents of companies were open and encouraging to that kind of process. And so I think that's important. We may all have different responsibilities depending on our role in the team, but we're all just as important. We're all just as important to contributing to the success of delivering to the customer whatever our promise and commitment is.
That is just so wonderful to hear. I rarely see leaders speak about this. It just sounds so encouraging to have that kind of culture within a company where people feel safe in approaching their managers, where they are encouraged to give feedback, whether positive or negative. But it's, of course, how you convey it is also important. As you said, that ownership to how we express ourselves. I think we need to have more conversations like this that other organizations can implement a similar environment within their companies. So I am a firm believer in value based leadership. When I wanted to start on my own, I started from there. That, okay, identify my values. So is that something which was important to you as well?
Yes. And it starts with, I think, what we need to have self awareness. We need to know where our strengths are. We need to know where our weaknesses are. I always say, to me, the successful leaders are the ones that recognize that they can't know everything. And ultimately, somebody has to make a decision, but you make that decision based on the broadest knowledge base you can find. And the only way you can find that is through your customers and through your teams, right? Companies do marketing research. Why do they do that? They want to know how the customer feels, what they like, what they don't like. And today, we get more surveys and opportunities for ratings than ever before. Those are all only as good as our self awareness and our acceptance of this feedback and this input, and then we can make it actionable. Now, we have to obviously filter those because we also know that people, for whatever reason, have bad experiences and maybe leave reviews or provide feedback that's more emotional than factual, and we can sort through that. Now, if that happens with our direct customers or even with our team, then that's a conversation that needs to be had. And so when you filter those and you notice that, this conversation is always important. And there used to be this old saying, the customer's always right. That's not true. The customer's not always right, but that's how they feel. And so we need to be very sensitive to that because we are customers, all of us, every single day. And sometimes it's a good idea to just flip it around and say, what if it was me in that role? How would I feel? And then have a conversation about that and say, where did it go wrong? Where did things not go to the level of our expectation, which is 100% satisfaction, 100% delivery of quality products? Nobody wants to be brushed off, whether it's a team member or a customer. Nobody wants that. And sometimes the answer is not what people want to hear, but the fact that they're getting an answer and an explanation that they can understand is then very important.
They know that this is like years of experience that's being reflected here. And we don't become leaders in a day. It is years
Correct.
of experience, the way we navigate the challenges, who we lead, how we lead. And it makes so much difference. So, what are some key takeaways of leadership that you have learned in your expansive career? Something that leaders need to probably learn or focus on.
I think the ability to interact and communicate is very important, and honesty is very important. People know and appreciate honesty. And it's okay to say, hey, we need to work through this. And when we develop young leaders, we, on the one hand, want to make sure they understand the basic tools of leadership, but more importantly, the culture, the communication, and the humility and honesty. And when young leaders have that, it gives you the ability to make mistakes without those mistakes going against you. If you're honest and humble about things and you communicate, then you can sort through a lot of stumbling blocks as a young leader and get appreciated for it because of how you're dealing with it. But honesty remains one of the most important elements of leadership. And once people have that, like I said, they can overcome the missteps that they have. We know we're going to make mistakes. It's obviously how we deal with them. And when we equip them and prepare them for that to happen and say, you will make mistakes, you will get an angry team member coming to you and saying, I don't understand what this is about. I feel like I've been wronged or whatever. It all goes back to staying true to who we are. Then it can be explained. We never want to all of a sudden start making things up, and then it creates confusion. And these folks will walk away and say, well, 3 months ago, that guy said that, and now he's saying this. What I feel like I'm not being treated honestly, or worse yet, I feel like my manager is incompetent because they don't know what they're talking about because they're switching talk tracks on me. And so stay true to who we are, be honest, be communicative, and have the conversation. Have the conversation. And the better, as the manager grows in their career, the better they are or become at detecting and being sensitive when these problems come up. And they can proactively say, hey, let's schedule a little bit of time. Let's go down into the break room and have a cup of coffee or a tea or whatever. And let's have a conversation about this because I feel like there's something that you're not comfortable with. So let's talk about that. And then you grow into the next level of leadership, which is the anticipation and proactively identifying where these challenges are and managing them before they become bigger than they need to be. Because really, once in sports, you hear the term, the coach has lost the locker room, right? You don't want to lose the locker room. Once everybody starts festering and talking amongst themselves and the conspiracy theories start and the hypotheses start, then it becomes a very difficult situation to manage. And at that point, you also know that things have gone very wrong. It should never come to that. And I think when people understand what we're talking about, and I've said this before, they may not agree 100%, but they will know why we're doing what we're doing. And that helps them then also think about what they can do better to help us as an organization, help us as managers to work through those. I've had numerous examples of this where we've had an open conversation and the team member walked away afterwards. And then after a week or two, they come back and say, you know what, I've thought about what you said and I've had some ideas. That's the response we're looking for. Because we don't know everything, we rely on the collective knowledge, the collective expertise of everyone. When they come back and say, I've thought about this and maybe here's something that might work and maybe we can, but it's that community that we're building, not a you are that and I am this. And so I'm going to tell you and then you come back and tell me that you did it. That's not the right approach, in my opinion. It's not going to be successful. It would only work if I was all knowing and knew everything, which clearly I don't. And that's the thing that leaders need to learn. A lot of times we feel like we pay for a leadership education class and they go off and they're sitting there with a bunch of other people and they're hearing this person talk and they say, here are the different leadership skills. That's okay to hear those and it's okay to know those and it's okay to know what tools we have in our tool bag. But it's much more important to know how to use those tools, not what those tools are. Because some of these tools can be very impactful, but if they're used incorrectly, they can be very damaging. So that's what we're trying to get young leaders to learn and understand.
Could you give an example about that? Just share how they can be useful, but yet, if used incorrectly, they can be damaging.
So we could have a policy that says if somebody doesn't perform at a certain level, we'll start an improvement program, which simply means You're being written up before your review, right? And so we can sit down with these people and say, okay, you did this and this and this wrong, and we need for you to eliminate these mistakes. Otherwise, when your review comes, you're going to get a bad review. And if this continues, then we'll ultimately terminate you, right? So that's a common process, performance improvement program. To me, that's a tool. How we use, if we use it incorrectly, that person is going to walk out of the room and say, this is not good. They might say, I'm a bad person. I don't know how to do my job. I don't know what to do my job better. Now I'm afraid of making mistakes. What we should say is, okay, here are the things that have happened over the last 3 months. So let's talk about them. Let's listen to your perspective, how you saw that. If it's an oversight, okay, let's talk about that. If it's not an oversight, why? What was the thinking behind what you did? And encourage people and make them understand that they bring a lot of value. They know they are an important part to the team. So let's figure out together how to get there. Very quickly, we'll learn whether these people just don't want to be there, whether they're disgruntled, whether they don't believe in the culture. They start talking about the president. Yeah, I heard the president give a talk to customers. It was terrible, blah, blah, blah. Well, either it was terrible or it wasn't. But if you feel that way, then let's have a conversation and say, okay, maybe this is not the right environment for you. Maybe we should talk about that. If it's a misunderstanding or if it's simply an area of true improvement, then we should talk about that and say, look, I'm here to help you. If you feel like you're getting to these points and you're making decisions that are going down the wrong path, then why not for the next couple of months, when you get to that point of making decision, let's talk about it. And then you tell me what that decision is and see if that makes sense or doesn't make sense. But they've obviously stopped communicating as well because a problem shouldn't arise after the fact. So that's an example of where a common tool we need to be careful with how we use it. If we value the team member and we want to be successful, then we need to use it to correct maybe some of the things, maybe culturally they didn't fit in, whatever, and we need to have those conversations. If we follow through and treat it as a process and say, I'm going to come back in 3 months and we're going to go down this list and see if you did it again, nobody wants to hear that. If you have a bad play on a sports team on the field and you come off and the coach yells at you, how do you feel? How do you feel? You feel miserable because deep down you wanted to win. You wanted to do the right thing. And now you're getting yelled at. So that's an example of how you can mishandle a common tool. And at that point, there's no return if you misuse it. If you use it correctly, make sure that people are confident, make sure they understand how far they can go with their decision making before they should communicate, maybe communicate more, maybe ask for more advice. Make sure you have a mentor that it could be me, it could be somebody else. Bounce it off them and say, here's what I'm thinking I need to do now. What do you think? I just need to bounce it off of someone. How does this sound to you? Those kind of things are how we deal with that tool to help that person. Not only they're going to perform better if they feel better. If they feel worse, they're going to perform worse. That's just the way it is. They're no longer going to be committed to their tasks. They're going to hate coming into work every day. And life is short. They shouldn't have to do that. If they're not in a role that will ultimately make them happy, then we can have that conversation as well. So that's one example.
Yeah. The two things that I'm hearing. One is the that it's so important to have that inclusivity, that we are all in this together, being part. It's all about us. It's not about you and me and that
Correct.
segregation, that division. We are in together. And the second that I'm hearing you, and these are great points, it's about talking, not making it personal. It's not making it about the person, but about the situation and what's going on and how it's impacting all of us, the person, the company, our goals, our results. And it's about the situation and not what the person did right or wrong. There's no such thing. And it's about getting behind the story to know why somebody did what they did and to understand their perspective. So those are great pointers. You've mentioned it in our talk so far that you've definitely gone through many challenges in your life. Can you share with us one challenge that you went through in your organization and how you worked on it, how you navigated that difficult time.
Sure. We were in a situation of flux as a company, and there were a lot of changes and potential future changes. We were divesting businesses, we were getting ready to be acquired. And there was a time where I think that led to a lack of everybody's focus was pulled in different directions. And I learned, interestingly, just to clarify, this was at a VP level, and I learned through a third person that there was frustration with the president of the company and that potentially this was not where I needed to be. And the way I managed the situation was, at first it was frustration and a lot of internal thought about whether I'm so unhappy now and distraught that I should just leave. And then once I got over that phase, I went and had a conversation and I scheduled some time and I sat down with the president and I said, look, these are some of the things that I'm hearing. And the first thing I need to know is if these are your thoughts. I just confronted him and I said, are these your thoughts? And is this your frustration as well with how things are going? And we confirmed that it was. And I said, well, then let's talk about it. Let me give you my viewpoint and share my feelings and then see where we go from here. Rather than letting it fester, I decided to confront it right away and have that conversation. The worst thing I think I could have done in that situation is to try and solve it on my own and say, well, this is what I heard, so maybe I need to try and do that. That was not going to be successful. So to have that open conversation that I initiated and say, let's work through this, then at least I would know if we were at a point where I was no longer the right fit and I had to make personal changes. But I needed to know that. So we have to not be afraid to know. So confront the situation, make sure we fully understand it, make sure we know, right? If it's bad news, that's just as valuable because there's no need to pull down the rest of the organization for me to be frustrated and unhappy. That'll trickle down into the teams and then they'll get frustrated and unhappy. So that's not healthy for the business. So we had the conversation and it turns out there was some miscommunication. And there were also some things that, given the fact that we were in a lot of transition and a lot of things were moving around and changing, and we were being forced on focusing on things like acquisitions and divestitures when we're not focused on doing what we'd originally been signed up to do. So we got some of those out. But then I was also open to the feedback that said, hey, here are some of the things that we think we dropped the ball on. And I thought about it. I said, you know what? That's true. That's true. So we need to correct that. So at that point, once you have that conversation, either be honest about it and say, okay, maybe we need to part ways if that's what it looks like and feels like, or just say, that's great. Let's come up with a plan. Let's refocus on what we're doing. Let's make sure we've got things covered where they need to be covered, and then move on and make sure we communicate about it. And in this particular example, it worked out very well. It was behind us and it never came up again. And we moved forward and corrected some of the things. And it was a two-way conversation. There was also some things that the president said where he said, I acknowledge that some of this is on me. I'm the president of this company and I'm sending mixed signals. So let's make sure that doesn't happen again. And I know I'm not communicating as often as I used to because I'm sitting in these investor meetings or these acquisition meetings or what have you. The encouragement from him to say, you do have my phone number, just text me. It doesn't matter. I might be tied up, but let's make sure so that we communicate. And it came back down to communication. Let's make sure we communicate more. And let's make sure, especially over the short term, the next month or two, we're correcting things in the direction that they should be going. So that's an example of something that initially looked like it was the end of the road and ultimately not only became resolved, but also benefited the company in the end because we demonstrated that behavior that we're expecting from others and then go back to the team and say, hey, here's what happened and here's where we're going so that they don't have to second guess. Is Udo now on his way out, or are they going to fire him or whatever. Have that conversation with the team and say, hey, this is what happened. We had a conversation, and we as a team need to focus a little bit more over here, a little bit more over there, or whatever the case may be. So that's an example.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. And what a great opportunity or a way to build trust. I think that's all it bottles down to, that to
Right.
build trust between you and the president, and then you and the team, to have that open conversation and to be very honest about what's going on. And I think that's what happened, I think, with the president also, because you were there, you were coming up and expressing. But it's also, I think, on his part that maybe he also created that environment for you to come and approach him and be
Correct.
honest. It's a great example of everything that you've been talking about so far. They always say that it's lonely at the top. And have you ever felt that in your
Not at
decision?
all.
Not at all.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. If it feels lonely at the top, then something's wrong. That's my view. Okay. And obviously, the top of the top is being the leader of the whole organization without any direct peers. Interestingly enough, that's part of the magic, in my opinion, at Johnson& Johnson, is that it is so inclusive that you are not alone ever. But in a smaller organization, my experience has been that it does come to that. But if you're at whatever level, if you feel like you're lonely, that's a bad sign. That's a really bad sign. And if someone feels that way, it's time to correct it very, very quickly, because that's not going to run down a good course. First of all, if we feel that way, then we're probably not communicating enough. We're not interacting enough. We're not out there enough. So it's in every possible way a red flag, right? We're not hearing enough. We don't have our finger on the pulse. We're not getting enough feedback. We're not able to bounce ideas off of other people and say, hey, here's where I think we want to go, and this is what I think we want to do. And then have people come back and feel very comfortable in a room, openly say, here's why I think that's maybe not the best idea, but maybe we should change it and do it like that. It goes back to that open communication and honesty. So to me, yeah, obviously we all know that saying, but when we hear it gets lonely at the top, that's a red flag for me.
Yeah, no, great point. You shared in your introduction also that you were in research and development for many years, and then you transitioned to global education and strategic marketing. So, what made you pivot from one to another?
So I think the first thing was that the environment that I was in at Johnson& Johnson provided for that and encouraged it. And the theory is that if you move around and pick up different experiences, it'll better yourself and it'll better the company. So the infrastructure was there for that. So that's important. And it was talked about. Lateral moves and other things were always talked about. For me personally, though, the decision point was a little bit that because of that, things do change. And so you're always encouraged to think about that. And so as I was encouraged to think about that, I think I realized that I was always an outward person with customers, even when I led R&D. I was the one that was in front of them and trained our folks on the teams to be in front of them. So I always believed in that. Customer facing is an important part of everything we do. In fact, we had all the way down to the technicians, we had opportunities for people to go into surgery and watch what happens with the devices in real life. We had opportunities for bringing in breast cancer patients to tell their story, and the whole room was crying, but it was the whole organization, top to bottom, that would listen to that. So I was always geared towards that. So naturally, I had already spent a lot of time in front of customers. And I believe the success to R&D is to making sure we fully understand not only the physicians, but the patient's needs. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And as such, built relationships that I felt very comfortable with. And when I say relationships, I don't mean best friends out in the medical community. I mean everyone I met, right? We built a relationship. We talked about their families, their work, their business, how they're running their practice. So it was a natural fit. The other exposure that I had leading R&D was looking at new opportunities. Internal, of course, but also external. What are other companies that come to us and say, hey, we have a product we think might be useful for you. And obviously, they're trying to divest their business or find an exit strategy and hope that a larger company picks it up. So I had a lot of exposure to that. And so I knew that I had some passion there. And I also felt like after, over 20 years in R&D, that for me personally, the daily project management approach and making sure projects are on budget and on time and dealing with that, while it was always exciting to get to the finish line, I felt that it was time. There were probably people out there that were more passionate about that than I was. And it would be beneficial to the organization for some other people to come in and do that. It was a long grind for a long time, and I loved every minute of it, but it does always come back to self-awareness and say, hey, am I still getting up in the morning saying, this is what I want to do. I want to have the project reviews. I want to have the budget reviews. I want to have the timeline reviews and move people around and do that work. And I felt that because of the length of time I'd not only spent with the company, but in that particular industry, which happens to be a fairly small industry, that my passion was more with the strategic side. Where do we want to be in 10 years? How are the customers feeling? What are we doing for the patients? What's working? What's not working? What are the new opportunities that we could potentially bring in, whether it be services or products? And how do we continue to build the strong relationship with the customers? So I felt much more passionate about that. And I think it'll come naturally as long as we're self-aware. We should never force. Sometimes we're forced to do things in our profession or in business company environment that we just have to do. And I'm all for that. But on a kind of day-to-day basis, if there's an opportunity to pivot towards something that I'm more passionate about, then that's something that's very important. And fortunately, at a company like Johnson & Johnson, of course, it's possible. And sometimes in small companies, it's not possible. And hopefully we can talk about those things and maybe change a little bit. I took a job straight out of VP of R&D into a position that didn't exist. We created a position. Okay. So you can also do that in a smaller company and say, okay, let's change the roles. Let's move people around a little bit. We feel like our bench is strong. We've got people coming up that can take my role and I can go on and do something a little different. And so the bench building is also very important. Otherwise, you never have that opportunity. But we want to prevent, and I think it's also, as a leader, it's important to show that's a good thing, right? Because people sometimes are afraid to ask or don't realize that opportunity exists. And then they get caught up in this rut. And then life gets boring, especially if they feel like they've reached their ceiling. Then they're just coming in and just going through their day and going through their day. And what we want to do is encourage people to pursue their personal development, grow and learn and be excited about what they do. So that's how it happened for me. It was the best thing ever. It allowed me to have probably the most exciting time I could have had for the last 10 years that I was with the organization. And like I mentioned earlier, to the point where it was a very difficult decision to make. I really didn't want to make that decision to retire, but that's how much fun it was. And that's how much personal enrichment I got out of doing what I did. So I encourage everybody at any level, and especially at the leadership level, to have that internal thought going on and continuously ask ourselves. And I feel that's true in our personal lives as well. What do I enjoy doing? Where do I want to grow? Where do I want to feel? Where do I feel like I can make a bigger impact? We want to be as excited as possible to getting up in the morning. The best night's sleep comes when we're so excited to go to sleep that we barely can, because we're so excited about getting up in the morning to do something, right? And that's, if we can accomplish that environment in our companies, in our organizations, then we're on a very good path. If in a perfect world, everybody cannot wait to get to work in the morning because they feel challenged, they feel like they're making an impact, they are very passionate about what they do, we're in a very good place.
As you mentioned, Johnson and Johnson's they encourage this kind of lateral or changing directions, but in the real world, it doesn't happen so comfortably or so easily. And I've heard it so often that it's difficult to change tracks, as in from moving from one to another, whether it's industry or positions or the responsibilities that we were handling. So, what would you advise to a person that if they are considering and they realize that this is no longer the right fit for them, what are some things that they can focus on? How can they market themselves or brand themselves to what they want to do?
So I think the first thing is to make sure you're ready for it, right? For me to say I wanted to go into a regulatory role, I would not have been ready for that. It's also not where my passion lies. But the point is, make sure that you prepare yourself. And you won't be at the level that you are in your current role if you've been in your current role for a long time because you've gotten all that experience and that knowledge. So make sure we're prepared because then we can market ourselves. Then we can say, this is why my background fits where I want to go. And this is what I've done to get me into that direction. And that can be a lot of different things. We see people go out and maybe they're in a technical role. They want to go into a more business role and kind of in the middle of their career, sometimes even a little bit later in their career, they go and they get an MBA. That's okay. And that's something that you have on a piece of paper as a hiring manager. That's the trick, right? You've got to figure out where you're going and who you're talking to when it comes to the hiring manager, because I've seen hiring managers go, if you don't have your MBA, we're not going to consider you for this role. I think that's a little bit tricky because you might hand someone a position that they've gotten a formal education in, but are really not culturally, behaviorally, whatever qualified to succeed in. So it goes back to what I said earlier in the conversation is let's make sure as managers we have people in a position where they can succeed. So now we're putting ourselves in that role when we're considering changing career tracks. We're going to say, I need to be in a position to succeed. Why do I believe that I can succeed? Why do I feel comfortable with making a decision to move into a different career track? We have to sort that out first. Because when we have that honest conversation with someone, we want to be able to not make up the story. We want to say, this is how I feel. This is why I feel the way I do. And this is why I'm passionate about it. And this is why I feel I have the right tools to do that. It's a learning experience. We're going to start learning again, which is exciting. Learning is always exciting. And that's one of the reasons for doing it, because now we have a long runway of learning again, where in our old roles, we may have reached the end of the runway and there was not much left. So while it's an exciting part of changing tracks, we have to make sure we're prepared for that. Going back to the sports analogy, if we're a sprinter and now we want to become a marathon runner, those are different requirements. So let's make sure we're prepared to make that transition. And I think once we do, we can market ourselves quite successfully and say, because it also shows that we've thought about it. We've given it thought to say, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to do. And we can honestly and openly speak about it, but it shows the person considering you that you have thought about it and that you've done something about it and that you're confident in going in that direction. Now, we have to be accepting of the fact that we might slide over and maybe on a career ladder take maybe a step backwards. That's okay. When I was young, I was like, wow, one day I want to be a president of the company. As I came along, it's the same as when we talked about the business model, right? Don't do it for the money, do it for doing the right thing. And that's the same thing. I thought, why am I getting caught up on that? I need to be able to contribute in the best way that I can and to feel fulfilled and be happy in the role that I'm in. So you don't market yourself by saying, I think I'm a good fit. I was a VP of R&D and therefore I think I'm going to be a good fit for a VP of marketing. That's not the conversation. Go back to your tools, go back to who you are, go back to what your strong points are and talk about those and say, this is why I'm passionate. This is why I want to do it. Don't have the conversation about the title. Obviously, the compensation, we all pay our rent and it would be hard to take a step back from that, but hopefully it doesn't come to that. But to market yourself, make sure you're prepared, make sure you know exactly why you're doing it and why you're passionate about doing it. and why you're confident that you will succeed. Then you can market yourself. I think that's really important. And some of the ways to prepare is, if you have any opportunity at all, and today it's a lot easier than it used to be in previous days, is to hook up with someone. It might be a friend, it might be whatever that does something a little different, and say, hey, can I just spend the day with you while you're at work or whatever. Obviously at Johnson & Johnson that was easy because there were any role you could think of existed, and you can say, hey, I want to piggyback for a day and see how you do your job and see what it's like or what have you. But any exposure you can get in the area that you want to go into, is going to be very helpful, not only to you, but also to the hiring person that says, wow, this person has actually been exposed to it and feels comfortable in it and knows what it's about and didn't just read about it on the internet or in a self-development book. So I think that's what's important.
I know you mentioned that now you've transitioned, you've retired recently, and so what is next for you, whether personally or professionally?
So obviously the personal reason was the biggest reason for doing this. And so we're well on our way there on committing time to family. And we're actually expecting our sixth grandchild this week. And
Wow, congrats.
so that's been amazing. And I tell my kids, if I would have known how great grandchildren were, I would have skipped the kids altogether and gone straight to the grandkids. But so on a personal level, I think the ability to be able to, whether we like it or not, when we're at work, we're tied into a bigger organization, into a bigger business structure. And so our life gets kind of organized for us inadvertently. And then we have meetings, we have phone calls. And so that to me, given the fact that I was spending 3 weeks out of the month for sure, traveling globally and living in hotel rooms and sitting on airplanes, that to me, from a personal health perspective and happiness perspective, has been a big change. I always loved where I was going. I didn't quite like the way it had to be with travel and everything else. So I'm going to continue to enjoy that benefit of being able to structure my life versus having it structured for me. Now that gives me the opportunity to continue to do projects and do consulting work. And I try and be selective in doing that to make sure that I can bring the passion that will help other people. If it's something I don't feel comfortable with, if I don't feel comfortable with the company culture, then I'm very open and honest about it and say it's not a good fit. I wouldn't be able to help you the way you need, the kind of effort and passion that you need. I'm honest about that. And then the projects I do choose are projects where there are some busy times sometimes, and I realize that, but it's the balance is towards my personal and family life versus towards work. And so I can fit that in. And so I look for opportunities where I can help people, where I feel like my experience and expertise is going to have a positive impact on them. I continue to live by my philosophy that if you do the right things, then there'll be some reward for that. So I never do it for the financial benefit. I appreciate the financial benefit, but I never do something just because it sounds like there's some money to be had. I feel like over the last 3 years, since I started I almost call it like an advisory role as opposed to a consultant role. I feel like my most rewarding projects and fulfilling projects and where I feel like I've made the most impact are actually projects that we shut down, where I spent time thinking about it, I spent time analyzing the project, and I was able to say, hey, for you guys to go in this direction is going to be very expensive and the likelihood of success is going to be very low. So I realize that I'm terminating my own source of revenue here, but and I tell them that. I say, look, I could sit here and tell you everything's going to be great and string this along for another year until it's not. But I feel like that's why you're asking me the question. And the answer is you shouldn't go in this direction. You should take that money and invest it over here. And so I realize with that I'm terminating, basically probably looking at finishing off this project with you, but that's okay. I am asked to provide you with what I think is the right thing to do. And then obviously it's up to you to make that decision. So to be able to do that is actually very rewarding, to be able to just say, hey, let's just focus and provide the right advice. And so, yeah, there's been like 2 or 3 examples recently where that's where it went. And I actually appreciate the fact that people were thankful for it and said, this is what we needed to hear. We didn't understand, and now we do. And thank you for helping us. And it's a very rewarding feeling. I believe, and we read this all the time, nobody cares about how much money you have in the bank when your time comes to an end on this earth. And I really believe that while it's a necessity to be able to pay our bills and our rent and everything else, the right balance would be that we're in a situation where we can do that, but we can also feel really good about what we're doing with our lives and what we're doing to help other people and to impact them in a positive way. And so to be able to do that is a huge gift. It's a huge gift. I could have kept working. I realized I retired at a pretty young age, but at some point you just look at that and you say, what's the most important thing? And when we look at the time we have with our families and the time we have on this earth, then, you know, as much as we can. And I don't say this lightly because there are a lot of people out there really working very hard to make ends meet. And I believe I did that too. But it's a gift if you can get it. And I see it now that I have an opportunity to interact with people that are volunteering and doing other things. They may not have a lot, but they're very happy and they're out there doing what they can to help the community, to help other people that need the help. And so that's kind of my view, is to, find as much of that personal enrichment and satisfaction by making a difference in somebody else's life.
So, first of all, congratulations on your sixth grandchild.
Thank you.
Yeah. And but also going back to the question and what you were talking about, it all reflects on your values, Udo. This is what you live by. And
Yeah.
that's why it is fulfilling, because you are connected with them and you're living it out every day. So I guess the people you're talking to also, they can see that authenticity, that honesty, where you're coming from. And that's why they respect you and value your opinion. So it's a great thing to model, I think, to others. I'm sure they're learning a lot by the way that you are carrying yourself. So thank you for that. And so, how do you look back at it all?
Well, I'm very thankful for the opportunities that I was given and the relationships that I've been able to build throughout my career. I still have contact with people that I'm no longer professionally involved with, customers, physicians. I don't know. I guess in my opinion, it depends on how you define what you want out of your career. In my opinion, I've just had the dream career, and I'm also very comfortable with the decisions that I made. I could have kept working and my pension would have been bigger and I would have had more money, but I'm very happy for having the opportunity to be able to do what I do now. And it's crazy, right? We think back at the successes we have and we feel good about that. But when I think about some of the crazy things we've gone through, I still have those conversations with my friends now, that at the time we were in these situations together and now we just laugh and we're like, did we know what we're doing? Did we know what was coming? No. But we embraced it and we said, well, here we go. And we figured it out. So even the challenging parts are very fond memories, although at the time they were not fond experiences. But looking back, they were fond memories and they actually created friendships that rise to the level of family. A lot of these people have become family. When I look back at my career, I feel very rewarded. I feel very fortunate to be able to have had the career that I did. And it's okay to feel proud of yourself and say, I did some things that I didn't think I was capable of, but I gave myself the opportunity and I had the courage and I went for it. I went for it. And a lot of times when we're young, we don't realize it. We go for it because we have to, right? I mean, we had 4 kids at a very young age. And I laugh sometimes. Fortunately, all those kids are doing very well and very fortunate. And they sit there and they go, well, I don't have X amount on my savings account right now. And I'm like, we literally burned it down to the last dollar to go get the formula and the diapers and the whatever. There was nothing. There was nothing. But at the time, you're in the moment. And that's the thing. Live in the moment. Do what you got to do. And so I look back at that and I'm like, wow, that was something else. And it's a good laugh when we talk about it now, the good old days or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, we're not always in a comfortable or successful situation. And I think when I look at successful people and how they manage that, their outlook in life is very different from those people that are just worried about trying to become rich, quote unquote, or whatever it may be. So in the moment, we had nothing, but it was a blast. It was scary, but it was something else. And we did it. And we did it. And so I think this satisfaction of being able to, having lived in the moment and fought through the battles, gives me memories just as much as some of the success stories. I hope to share as much as I can. I hope people can benefit from some of my experiences and some of the things that I've done. But I did them for no other reason than to do the best I could every time I stepped out of bed in the morning. The other thing is, people say this all the time, but you have to live it. If you can't control it, don't worry about it. We only have so much gas in the tank. And if we're going to burn it on things we can't control, then that's less that we can use on things that we can control or where we can make a difference. And then we feel better because we're making more of a difference than we would if we worried about the things that we can't change. And that's the way. So if I got dealt a bad hand, I got dealt a bad hand. There was what it was. If I could do something about it, I would give it my best shot. If I couldn't do anything about it, I wouldn't think about it again, because there's no sense in wasting any energy, stress, whatever it may be, on things that I can't change. And I think that was also something that just makes you feel a little, certainly not necessarily relaxed in a situation like that, but it provides you with more energy to push towards where we need to go.
Yeah. So, is there anything that you could have done differently?
This is a really good question, right? Because obviously we get better by analyzing what we do and then saying, hey, can I do that better? And I would say that in the moment, while I'm active in that, whatever it is, project, period of management of a certain group, whatever it may be, part of a group, whatever, that's very important. But I think it goes back to the comment about whether I can control something. I really don't. I really look back fondly on my career, and I don't, because that won't change anything now. I don't think that way. I don't say if I would have done that, I could have done this. So it is what it is. And could my life have turned out better in however better is defined, financially, hierarchy in a company or whatever? I don't know. I don't know. And would those things have been better if I would have had more money, or if I would have had a bigger title or whatever? Would that have made a difference? I don't know the answer to that, so I don't worry about that. So my personal thing is, once I'm out of the phase of having direct involvement, then I look back at it and take it for what it was and don't think about what could have been. I don't. And it's funny, now I have time to play a lot of golf, and the same applies. Once I hit a bad shot, I can't go back and replay it and say, what if that would have been? I have to put my energy into the next shot, which is probably coming out of the woods somewhere, and making sure I don't hit a tree or something. So that's an example of kind of my mindset, is when you're in the moment of being able to control it, you should always question, whether I can do things differently. And you can learn, if you go from a previous project to a next project and say, the last project I did this, it didn't work out, but now I'm going to do it differently. But that's behind me. So then once it's behind me and I'm no longer in that situation, then I don't worry about whether I could have done it better or not. Now, if I'm going into a situation where it's similar to what I have done, then I'm going to look at it and say, is there something I could have done differently? But not for looking back, but for looking forward. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, that's great. And my last question would be that I know we've talked a lot about leadership and what leaders can do differently or how they can improve their leadership skills. And you were very fortunate to have that environment. What would you say to young leaders who are keen to develop themselves but don't have the right environment or the right mentorship?
Put yourself in an environment and a role where you have the ability to succeed. If what we talked about before, the open communication and the honesty and all that, if that's not working, don't force it. Don't force it. Sometimes things will change. I've seen that. I've experienced it, where you notice that there's an opportunity for change. You may make the decision to just kind of hang tight for a while. Be patient, learn as much as you can, get as much experience as you go along. If you feel like there's no opportunity for change, go look for a different environment. You don't want to force something that you can't make happen. You're just going to get frustrated, and it's going to reflect on your performance. It's going to reflect on your ability to grow. It's going to reflect on your ability to learn. So make sure you're in an environment that suits who you are. If you're not in it, like I said, if you feel like change might be coming, then it's okay to wait. If you feel like that's the way it is and you're not comfortable, I gave the example of executive management at Mentor when we got acquired. Those people didn't make the decision, I think, to leave because they didn't think they could be successful or impactful at J&J. It was not their environment. That's not where they wanted to be. They had a chance over the first year after the acquisition to learn about the environment, and it wasn't for them. It doesn't mean that they were right and Johnson & Johnson was wrong or vice versa. Doesn't mean that at all. They were just in a situation that didn't fit who they were. So the decision they made was to go out and look for something that they would fit into. So make sure you have that awareness. Don't always expect the company to deliver what you want them to deliver in terms of your personal growth and your personal development, because they may not be able to, and it may not be an industry that they're in or an environment that they're in or a culture they're in to where they can provide you with what you want. So it's just as important for you to get into the right situation than it is for the company to hire the right people and that fit in. It's the same discussion we had about switching career paths, right? Where is your passion? Where do you culturally fit in? Where do you think you can grow? Where do you think you can succeed? Because that's what the company wants. They don't want someone that doesn't want to be there, that doesn't want to succeed there, or that feels that they can't succeed there. Every single person, no matter what level they're at, we wanted to make sure that they were happy in their careers, that they were bringing the passion, that they were bringing themselves 100% every day. So if you feel like you can't do that in the environment that you're in, then I think the right thing to do is to find that environment.
No, that's great advice. It makes so much sense. Well, Udo, thank you so much. Thank you for your time again. I think this has been such a wonderful and informative conversation. I'm sure my listeners are going to really benefit from your experience, your knowledge, and what you've shared. So, this is so valuable for so many of us.
Well, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation as well. And this is an example, right? As you and I have these conversations, we're both learning, and I'm listening to some of the things that you say, and that's how we enrich each other and grow from it. And hopefully the folks out there are having those conversations in the worlds that they live in and recognize the value of it and benefit from those.
If you found the content valuable, please like, share, and subscribe and spread the word. I feel the best compliment is being referred, that one action of yours can help us reach more people and fulfill the mission of thriving changes. Thank you for considering.